And then I just want to introduce Kolby a little bit because I just like fell in love with Kolby before I even met her, because I was doing this project that some of you have heard about, doing some research on some children who died in Bellingham. I couldn't find any information, so I just wrote a call out. I think it was to the Whatcom Historical Society, right? Or genealogy group. And anyway, the person who responded was Kolby, and she had so much information. She had everything I wanted. She sent me this whole list of stuff. And from there, that first encounter, I've been able to really build on it. So we've had some other communications. I've been to other programs that Kolby offered online through Bellingham, Parks and Rec, and I've seen some other things I think that are on YouTube that you've done. And we actually had a chance to meet for coffee and talk about her interesting, to me, interesting story of her pathway through history, genealogy. And so I'm really happy that she's agreed to share stuff with us, and hopefully it'll trigger your imagination. So Kolby, thank you. Kolby Labrie.
Thank you, Kathy. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. My name's Colby Labrie, as you know and can see, and I am, let's see, a third generation Whatcom County resident. I went and sowed some wild oats and traveled around the country for a while and ended up coming back here. I just love the Pacific Northwest, and I don't get over to the islands as often as I would like to, but that's on my bucket list right now. Things I'd like to do again soon. I went to Western Washington University and got a degree in anthropology from there a few years back now. And that's really, when I was there, I interned at the Whatcom Museum here in Bellingham in the photo archives. And that is where I really fell in love with local history, and also started into my own genealogy and family history. And I have 3 kids, all daughters. 2 of them are now adults. So anyway, I love family history. I love genealogy. I've started working after college, mostly in historic preservation area, doing survey work. I've done surveyed thousands of historic homes in neighborhoods here in Bellingham. And also love to do individual house history research for people who just want to know more about the history of their house or building. So that's something I also really love to do. I'm on the Historic Preservation Commission here in Bellingham currently. I also am co-editing the Whatcom County Historical Society Journal with Dean Kahn, who's formerly of the Bellingham Herald. And so that's been fun. Last year was my first year doing that. So we're always looking for submissions. It's mostly Whatcom County, but there's some crossover often. So just keep that in mind. And what else about me? I'm gonna share my screen with you and tell you about this little business that I've ended up in, giving historical tours here in Bellingham. So hopefully y'all can see this. And Kathy and others who are moderating or hosting here, I'm gonna let you just feel free to jump in if there's something, a question. So if people want to put questions in the chat, it's kind of hard for me to monitor that, but you guys can help me out. Just jump in. So I have been, let's see, I started doing historical walking tours with a local group called the Good Time Girls here in Bellingham back in 2012. I started out as a tour guide and started doing it on the side kind of for fun. And this was started out around stories about the town of Bellingham's sort of Wild Westy saloon days of brothels and things like that. So here's just like a grid of some action shots over the years of various guides giving tours. One of our things is to be in costume, often in sort of a corseted look of the old French, risque postcard, vintage era style. Of course, no one, not even a working girl of those days, would have worn this out on the streets like we do, but it's fun and people enjoy it. So the whole tour was started around, and I think kind of inspired by a book written by a local Bellingham, I think he's a dentist, Curtis Smith, and he just got interested in the history of brothels in Bellingham and wrote this fun little book about it. And Marissa McGrath and Sarah Holodnik started doing tours sort of based off of these stories in 2011. Of course, I joined in 2012. I just put this presentation together, kind of cobbled from other presentations I've done, so hopefully it'll work out for me here. They also opened a storefront while we were giving tours called the Bureau of Historical Investigation on Holly Street, but it's no longer open. They've moved on to other things, and I took over the business just of doing tours in 2018. So with Ren Urbakite here, who has been my business partner since then. And I am just a history nerd. So hold on one moment. I am going to adjust my slideshow here for a second. Why is it doing this to me? Okay, I don't need that. Sorry.
No worries. But I love the whole book. I love the book theme.
Great. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't advance when I don't want it to. I don't know why it's set to do this, but okay, let's go from here. Okay. All righty. Back to the show. This is just a photo of some of our guides that in the past. And so the main tour that's really been the bread and butter has been this, it's called our Synongen Tour. So here we are, brothels and booze. It's basically in a nutshell. We have a version for both downtown Bellingham and the neighborhood of Fairhaven, which of course was once its own little town with its own little red light district. And it's a fun little neighborhood to give tours in with their beloved old buildings and things. So very popular. And the gin element of the tour. So we often, especially in downtown, we talk a lot about Prohibition-era. And one of the fun parts of the tour is that we normally in pre-pandemic times like to do was have a drink option at the end of the tour. So we would partner with different local businesses and establishments to have some kind of a deal at the end for those who wanted to have a drink and chit chat some more at the end of the tour. And just kind of briefly, I just threw in some example pictures and things. I use a lot of photos from our Whatcom Museum photo archives in the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies. I'm just a photo and research nerd, so I still volunteer at the museum to this day. In fact, I went in for the first time since the pandemic just a few weeks ago, so it was pretty exciting. I've missed it. Okay, so this is just a little picture of looking down Holly Street that shows where the old red light district was when it was the town of New Whatcom. And like many towns in the Pacific Northwest, the big trees made building right on the beaches on pilings kind of the first go-to. So none of this exists anymore. They were all buildings built on the docks, on the tide flats. Just a little fun bit there. And also I get really excited about maps. I'm sure many of you can relate. So I use a lot of the Sanborn fire insurance maps, for instance. With this little clip here is showing some of the female boarding houses, as they like to label them, or FB sometimes for short, actually on the maps. And that those were brothels. And this big black one there in the middle was May Wright's castle. Always stuck out like a sore thumb in all of the pictures of this area from that time frame. She was one of the she owned property in both Bellingham or Whatcom and Fairhaven, which are now all part of Bellingham. And it was one of the first telephone subscribers, I imagine, so she could keep track between the two brothels. And of course, saloons were a big part of these tours too. And this one I like to put in here because it's the Horseshoe Saloon, which continues its lineage to this day in Bellingham as the rather infamous Horseshoe Cafe on Holly Street, which is still operating. So it calls itself one of the longest continually operating businesses. You know, that's up for debate, but it's a fun one. And yeah, this is one of our guides over in Fairhaven. In front of this sign is sadly a ghost of a ghost sign now, because they redid the foundation on this building. It's the Morgan block on the corner of 10th and Harris in Fairhaven, where Good Earth Pottery is. And when they were doing repair work or foundation work, they ended up, you know, taking apart this whole mural. It's a little Rainier beer mural on the side of what was an old saloon there. And again, just a fun old picture of Harris Avenue in Fairhaven. So this is right across from there. And the Capitol sample room here was connected to the Olympia Brewery and Leopold Schmidt, who ran that brewery, as well as one in Bellingham. So it became later bought out by a Norwegian Captain Hans Hansen, who was, you know, a seagoing man known for maybe smuggling some things as well. And his legacy still lives on in Bellingham in the form of Cap Hansen's Tavern in downtown Bellingham, which is, again, a long running business that got its start back in these old saloon days. And he changed the spelling from Capital with an AL to Capitol with an OL. Just a clever way to keep the name going there. So some other tours that we do, of course, everyone loves the spooky tours. So we've traditionally in October, we do what we call our Gore and Lore tours. And this is, you know, fun, you know, seasonal lore and legends, from ghost stories to true crime kind of stories and all that kind of fun stuff. These are our most popular tours by far. It's always our busiest month. I can say I've never seen a ghost. They don't seem to want to show themselves to me. Not that I am a non-believer, I just never met one. But I am fascinated by the amount of ghost stories I hear every single time I give a tour. Someone on the tour, I think, tells me their own, you know, ghost encounters and ghost stories. So it's a pretty interesting, I think, phenomenon in general. So yeah, here's us in action doing some of those tours over in Fairhaven, which is Bellingham's haunted hotspot. Also, a tour that I love to give is sort of a tour that I came up with actually as part of a field trip curriculum for middle schoolers in here in Bellingham, and it's around Whatcom Creek. It's a nice, there's a park right around Whatcom Creek in downtown Bellingham where you can walk around and visit several pretty interesting historic sites right there. And so it's a good one to take kids on. It's kind of a like Bellingham History 101 in terms of, you know, from the, I always, you know, at the beginning of our tours, I don't have it in here, but I always do a recognition that, the town of Bellingham is built on lands that are Coast Salish tribal lands since, 10,000 plus years. And most of the history that we talk about is starting 160-ish years ago, when a bunch of failed 49ers showed up and took donation land claims. So this is kind of the story around Whatcom Creek, which I like to call the birth canal of Bellingham. It was both important for native use for a long time in salmon fishing, and then of course became a site for industry and a sawmill and things along those lines. And of course we have some somewhat now controversial history around Captain Pickett. At the time he was in Bellingham prior to the Civil War, and of course he has ties to the islands with the Pig War and all of this, but the Pickett House being right above the park there is another historical site, which was built for him during his stay in building Fort Bellingham and the military road to Fort Steilacoom. And his son, James Tilton Pickett, by a native woman, is another fascinating story that we like to tell. Also, I'm really interested in telling stories of groups that you never hear about. And in fact, a lot of people had no idea that there was quite a large Japantown in what is now Bellingham's called our Old Town area of downtown. And there was, a peak population of several hundred families living in and around that area in the early 1900s. And were there during the Sikh riots that happened in 1907. So there's some really interesting Asian history in the area as well that I like to touch on in our tours. This is just another example of a tour that we do that people love, which is a holiday history tour, which is it's more of a fun pub crawl kind of a thing. We do caroling. We do have history stories in there that are holiday themed as well. People really love that tour, but we haven't done that one. We've done a lot of things since the pandemic, but these are just some fun pictures of us. We like to try to have things that are fun and interactive. I bring little mustaches for people to take pictures and do fun things on our tours. Oops, wrong way. But of course, pandemic has been happening. And so we didn't do anything much at all for the first, part of the pandemic. And then cautiously started doing some private tours, for families with our pods, masked and distanced and outdoors and everything. It seems like pretty safe activity to continue doing. So we've been doing that and continue to do that. Here's me in action giving a masked tour. My get up there. And we couldn't do the same thing with our spooky tours. We tried to do some different things. So this is some of the girls out at Woodstock Farms, which is now, it's out on Chuckanut Drive and is owned by City Parks now and is a public park. And it's a gorgeous old gentleman's farm that was the property of Cyrus Gates family, who was tied in with the Larrabees. A lot of cool history there, beautiful site to visit. And there's some really amazing buildings on the property as well. So we got to go in the building and do a live ghost story telling from out there. It was really fun. So that was all Chuckanut area themed spooky stories. And Zooming, a lot of Zooming we've been doing. We did our holiday event over Zoom, which was interesting. It was impossible to do caroling over Zoom. I'll just put that out there, but it was still fun. We had fun and talked about holiday history and things like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my own genealogy interests and things like that. Besides doing tours, I still do a lot of research projects on the side. I currently have been doing a couple of different historic building and house history research projects. And also I've been researching and writing about the first African-American student at Western in 1906. So they're going to name a new residence hall for her, which is pretty fun. But being that you guys are Orcas Island, I was like, I got to get back to this side of my family that has ties over there. And maybe some of you can help me out with some of my research that I haven't visited for a while. But this all started. So this is my dad's side of the family, who I mentioned are French Canadian, the LaBrees, which originally was like Mignon de LaBree or something like that, and became shortened to LaBree, which just meant like from the Brie region of France, presumably, and has been spelled in a lot of different ways, as I'm sure everyone's familiar with who does genealogy. And this here, Emery on the far left, the mustached tall guy here, was my great grandfather, who was born in, he was actually born at Rice Lake, Wisconsin in 1885. And this is his father and the whole family, big Catholic families on this side of the family tree. And they had come from Quebec down to Wisconsin. And then they bounced back up into Alberta, where they homesteaded in what was called St. Edward, named for my great-great-grandfather. And that is where my Emery was at when he was about 16 or 17 years of age. They all moved up there and were homesteading. And this was near a place called St. Paul de Métis in Alberta. And in 1909, Emery married Valina Bastarash, whose name I mentioned earlier. And they had my grandfather. This is my grandpa, whose name was Emilio. It's not Emilio, it's Emilio. I don't know. That's what they named him. And he was born up in Canada in 1911. So this is a story I actually tell on my tours, because it was a thing I found out doing my own family genealogy, but none of the family knew about it. But Emery LaBree actually was arrested and thrown into Whatcom County Jail for running booze from Canada down here to Bellingham in the 1920s. And kind of in a nutshell, there was Italian brothers who ran a grocery, the Tripoli grocery down on Holly Street, the Deprile brothers, Julius and Frank. And they were, of course, operating it as a speakeasy or a blind pig, as they sometimes like to call it at here. That was apparently the most popular term, or a joint. So they were running a joint out of their grocery store, and my grandfather was one of the ones supplying them, my great grandfather, with hooch from Canada. So this was when my grandfather was probably like 10 or years old or so, and they were actually living in Chilliwack, BC at the time. So it's kind of a funny story. And of course, in the Pacific Northwest, Prohibition era was pretty hopping, with the Canada being so close by, and the being on the water. There was a lot of smuggling going on, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. So also the fun part about that story is during the trial, which my great-grandfather basically got I'm sure a reduced sentence for kind of ratting out the big guys. But there were flapper girls of young age who hung out at the speakeasy, and with their short bobbed hair and their rouged lips, it was like a scandal. And they were called on witnesses to the trial because they were encouraged to hang around at the speakeasy and encourage the men to keep buying drinks, of course. But so back to My grandfather, Emilo, his family, shortly after the whole booze episode, they moved here to Bellingham and into the Silver Beach area in 1928 when my grandpa was about 17. And in 1932, he married his first wife, whose name was Violet LaPlante, in Bellingham. Now, this is the same year that Washington State voted to repeal all the prohibition laws, which was slightly ahead of nationwide repeal. But so that happened. And I believe these pictures are from, probably, given the ages of everybody involved, they're probably celebrating the end of prohibition here. This is a bunch of the French Canadian relatives. My grandfather, Emilo in the middle, Emery over here with the fiddle. Not sure who the other individuals are, but this is on their property in Silver Beach. Maybe celebrating the end of prohibition, maybe just another Friday night in the LaBree family. It's hard to say. But they loved their cars, clearly. And Violet LaPlante, I have very few pictures of her here. She was my grandfather's first wife, so my grandmother came into the picture later. And they had one son, my Uncle Marvin, and he's my father's, the oldest son. They had a very nasty divorce in about 1935, very publicized, very unusual at those times, and scandalous, right? And in fact, it was a scandal for my grandmother to marry a divorced man with a son. But interesting, they were kind of wild characters. So Marvin bounced around between his grandparents and parents. This is my grandfather and my grandmother, Ruth Olson, who was Swedish through and through and very religious and different side of the family. But they like to square dance. That's them. But the tie to Orcas Island is through Violet LaPlante. So it's not my blood relatives, but talking about going down rabbit holes, I had to find out about my Uncle Marvin's side of the family. And I was pretty interesting stuff. And some of you may know some of this history or have ties, and I'd love to find out more about it because I haven't gone down this research route in a while. But this is Violet LaPlante's mother and father, William LaPlante, and Winnie Howard was her maiden name, holding their two eldest children. And this was taken on Orcas Island. And as far as I know, William was born on Orcas Island in 1874. And these I found on, I think were from Ancestry, these photos. So maybe some of you have seen these before or know where they came from originally, because they're not the greatest copies, but these are so William's parents were Peter LaPlante here, who is in this picture with other members of his family. I think this is his brother-in-law, who is Joseph Bull. And I think this is his nephew in the back left, who is Tommy Frechette. And I'm not certain about the relationship to the other guy in the back, who's Pat Bodine. And then William LaPlante's mother was Adele Iotti, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I went to school with an Iotti that pronounced it that way. So Iotte is the spelling. And this is her here on the left, and her sister, who I think is married to Mr. Bull there. And so these folks were all what in my French Canadian lineage and research, you probably have heard the term métis, if you have any French Canadian background, which just means mixed. So a lot of these folks have Native American lineage and were considered mixed. Let's see, Peter LaPlante's father was a Hudson's Bay Company man who had land in the Cowlitz area, and his mother, so Peter LaPlante, there's so many Peters, I can't keep them all straight. Peter, the highest one, the eldest, was married to a woman who was half-blooded in the Cowlitz tribe. And then on the Ioti side, her mother was a member of the Lummi tribe, which is based up here in Whatcom County heavily now. So very interesting to me, all this lineage. This is one of the, of course, enrollment allotment applications. This is Peter LaPlante's, and it acknowledges his relatives there and his mother Catherine's belonging by half to the Cowlitz tribe. And this picture again, I found on Ancestry, and is Peter in his later years with his 3 sisters, who are Adele Bradshaw Nichols, I think she married 2 times, Catherine Frechette, and Victoria Taylor Goetz. I'm not sure the pronunciation on that one. All Orcas Island families. So I don't know if these ring any bells for people. And these are, again, pictures that I just pulled out of my files that I must have gotten from Ancestry, and I have no idea who any of these people are. I would love to get some identification. Supposedly some of them in this photo are LaPlantes. Don't know. Also found the Salvation Army Band photo, which I think has members of the LaPlantes and Bull families in it. No clue who's who. But so I'm really interested in this side of my family tree. And this is William and Winnie in their later years when they lived in Bellingham. And William, again, being Violet, my grandfather's first wife's parents. And he, interestingly, had also been previously married to Carolyn King. And she and their infant daughter, Verna, were drowned in 1904 in the wreck of the steamer Clallam, which is probably, I'm assuming, a big story of interest for islanders as well. But I hadn't known much about it until I came across this story. Also lost was William LaPlante's sister, Della or Deli Sullins, and her 3 young children. And also William's brother, Peter LaPlante Jr. And William was a survivor of the wreck. And so in his later years, he was interviewed in different newspapers and things about that experience. And it still haunted him at age 85 in 1960, more than half a century later. And you guys might already know all about the steamer wreck, but I just threw in some of the pictures and things I'd had here. I've read various sources, various newspapers and various places online kind of give different numbers in terms of how many died and all of that. But between 51 and 56, I've seen 90 to 92 total people on the ship. More than half clearly did not survive. And all the children who perished were all members of the LaPlante family. Considered one of the worst disasters ever in Washington State's inland waters. This is a really bad photo of the Clallam that I had. And yeah, so that was January, and there was, the normally pretty tame waters there was a big storm, high rain, snow mix in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And I think later, at the times they blamed it on a porthole that was, broken or faulty and started taking in water. But I think later that was disputed. But in William's recollections, he was with a party of 12 San Juan Islanders, and they were heading to Canada to work in a mine, which I think one of his brother-in-laws was invested in. And there's a lot, again, there's various different witness accounts that I have found that give different conflicting information about the experience, but it seems like water starts coming in to the engine room, and they're trying to pump it out, but that wasn't working. and it, finally reached the fire boxes and extinguished the fires. And then the ship's dead in the water and just being tossed around in this storm. More windows are being smashed out, things like that. Of course, this was no radios, so their only means of alerting was flares, which were missing from the vessel, so they couldn't do that. And eventually, they're like, okay, this is getting bad. So they call all the able-bodied men, including William LaPlante, to form a bucket brigade, and they're madly trying to, dump cargo overboard and do all they can. And eventually the captain made the decision to abandon ship. The lifeboats, these are from newspaper articles. They're not the greatest images, but the first lifeboat, they basically filled them with the women and children, as you would, but as they lowered them down into the sea, they were either dumped or smashed or quickly capsized. So they did this 3 times and watched what happened as all their families were, thrown into the sea and disappeared. So then let's not do any more lifeboats after that. He was preparing to meet his death on the ship as it was still taking on water. But then eventually some rescue tugs came to the rescue from Port Townsend, the Sea Lion and the Richard Holyoke, I don't know how it's pronounced, but that was a whole nother thing. And the captain didn't let them know. He was like, oh yeah, we're leaking, can you give us a tow? Well, they weren't just leaking, they were sinking. So there was more problems. The boat continued to sink, and William LaPlante was one of the men who managed to, as the boat sank, one of the top parts of it broke away, and he was just clinging on to that until a tug managed to get close enough and pull them off. So what a horrifying experience. And then he was called on to, be part of the trials afterwards, when they were trying to find whether Captain Roberts and the chief engineer Delaunay were, had responsibility in the wreck, which they did find, but as far as I know, they didn't, serve time or anything like that. But their licenses were revoked. So a horrifying experience. I know one of his brother-in-laws that survived the shipwreck had sort of a nervous breakdown afterwards, and later lost his life drowning in the Fraser River. It was really interesting to me to find out about that that whole story. And like, I might be preaching to the choir here because you guys probably know more about it than me, but I think it's really interesting. And there were persons from Bellingham on the boat as well. So that's a story that I have told here in Bellingham also. And that boat was actually like, there was all these horrible signs of bad luck, right? With apparently someone had hoisted the flag upside down, which is and bad luck. And during christening, the champagne bottle somehow missed the boat, which is again another big bad luck thing. And there was apparently a flock of sheep that regularly were taken on board back and forth that refused to get on the boat. So was that a premonition? A lot of people wondered. So I'm not sure what we're doing for timing here. I have more stuff I can talk about if you want to hear about any of my other projects, or I'm happy to answer questions. But if you want to let me know, I wasn't sure 10:30, 11:30, how long we have to go on for.
You can still go. I think it's really fascinating. I don't know anything about this ship at all. So
yeah, it
wow.
is really fascinating. And again, I'd never heard of the story either. And so I've been doing cemetery tours, and one of the victims is buried here in Bellingham Cemetery, a young woman. So it's an interesting story to tell on that tour as well. Let me jump ahead here.
Hey, Colby, can I interject?
Sure, yeah.
I have some information that I should send to you, but
Wonderful.
Boyd Pratt did research on Sunshine Alley and Nichols Street here in Friday Harbor. And they are very tied, the history is very tied to a woman named Adele Nichols. And I'm just going to read this very little bit to you. Adele Nichols was born in 1856 at Cowlitz Landing in Oregon to Peter LaPlante and Catherine Delaney. I don't know how to pronounce that. And Catherine, and so there's this tie to your family to here through, if I'm understanding this right, through Peter LaPlante and Catherine.
Yes.
So when this is done, I want to send you this piece that Boyd did on the history, and then I want you to get in contact with Boyd because there were a lot of gaps in what he was able to find out. But as soon as you started talking Peter LaPlante, I was thinking, that really sounds familiar. So I looked in my files, and sure enough, there was connections to Peter Frechette, who married Adele's sister, and on and on.
Yes.
So
yeah, they're all very intertwined, these families. It's hard to disentangle all of that. Well, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate any leads and connections with all of that research. And again, this isn't something I'd looked at in a long time. I'm busy with all my other projects. I rarely have time to look at my own family trees these days, but I would love to revisit that more. I can tell you guys a little bit about, I'm kind of excited about this project that I've been working on, and I think it's kind of a timely and interesting story, which I just kind of fell into by accident. I just came across the story of this student who came to what at the time was the normal school here in Bellingham, whose name was Miss Alma J. Clark of Seattle. And this was 1906. So Bellingham had at that time one of, I think there were 2 or more state normal schools in the state at the time, but it was fairly new still. And it was, to become a teacher, mostly a lot of young women. And Miss Alma here was also considered of mixed race or colored in the parlance of the time. And she, her family, the Clarks in Seattle, there's this really interesting period around this time in Seattle that I've been finding more and more out about, and reading Dr. Taylor from the UW in Seattle, whose African-American books on the history in the area are like wonderful. But it was this weird little time when, there weren't a lot here in the area. So they experienced kind of a lot more tolerance and opportunities, and was sort of this booming time. And her family, her father, Robert A. Clark, had a delivery service, so like a courier with horses and wagons, and did very well. They owned houses. And recently in Seattle, the historic nomination, I believe, was passed for the Caton Revels House, which was Horace Caton, was an African-American who published the Seattle Republican newspaper. And these families were very much friends and intertwined as well in Seattle. So they were kind of an interesting time of African-American history in Seattle. And Alma was I think the 4th African-American student to graduate from Seattle's Seattle High School is what it was called at the time, but it later became known as Washington and then Broadway High School before it was demolished in 1974. And I think Seattle Central Community College is on the site now. But here's her little picture down there. But when she came to the normal school in Bellingham, it caused a commotion, as the newspaper said, and they wrote a rather sensational story about her arrival. Apparently there was some students who threatened to withdraw from the school if she was allowed to attend. However, the faculty and trustees all stood by her being there, and they passed a resolution to be made public stating, whereas certain misleading statements have been published regarding the race question at the Bellingham Normal School, resolved that the school is for the benefit of all the people of Washington State, regardless of color, race, or politics, good works and good morals being the essentials required of students. So this is I just think this is a really interesting story. And Western is building a new residence hall for students. And so they are choosing to name it after Alma Clark. And the focus of the residence hall is to have more accessibility for people with disabilities, and also to have more inclusivity. There's going to be affinity housing for Black students. Alma also was appointed a librarian at Seattle Central Library in 1906, assistant librarian. She scored the highest on the civil service exams for gaining that position. Unfortunately, that little time, this is the student hall, it's under construction still. I think it's going to be completed hopefully over the summer and ready for occupancy in the fall. And this is on the site of the former Highland Hall on Western's campus. So Alma's family, though, and all the African-American community in Seattle, as their numbers grew, unfortunately, so did the white population's tolerance, and things took turns for the worse. So Alma ended up being a founding member of the NAACP in Seattle and was active in that through her entire life. And through my working on her genealogy, I was able to find her, her granddaughter living in LA and put Western in contact with her. So her family knew nothing about her grandmother's experience at the school. It was something she hadn't talked about, even though her granddaughter lived with her grandma in Seattle from the time she was 6 till the time she was 12, and had really interesting stories about her, and would go to the NAACP offices and run the, what was the copy machine? What'd you call it? The can't remember the old fashioned name for it. But anyway, it's a really interesting story. There we go. Thank you. It was escaping me. Fascinating story. And so I've been working on this with Western, and they're going to publish a little story about it in the alumni magazine. And I'm sending lots of printing and sending, because they're older folks who aren't, you know, super savvy with technology. So I'm printing all my, you know, research that I'm finding on the family and sending it to them. And it's been a really fun and rewarding experience for me. I think I would like to give you guys some time to just ask me questions and talk about whatever you want to hear me talk about. Does that sound good? Do we have any questions for me about tours or history or anything?
I have a question about your magazine.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about it, the name and how people might get a copy, or yeah.
Are you referring to the magazine article I was just talking about, or the journal?
The journal. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on.
You're working on with Dean.
So I took over the Historical Society's Facebook page, but I hardly have time to do much on there. But there is a Facebook page for the Whatcom County Historical Society. And if you go on there, hopefully there'll be more and more posts and information. But this is the journal, what it looks like, and it comes out every December. And there's also, I think the Whatcom County Historical Society has a web page with all the information on there. most people on the board of the Historical Society are older and not super computer people. So it's been kind of an interesting journey, and I'm trying to be more involved and help them more in that way. But I just started doing this at, like I said, editing the journal last year. And it's not necessarily scholarly, you know, it can be anything just pertaining to Whatcom County history, and especially if there are photos. We love it when there's photos. So yeah. And
What are
Dean
some
is amazing. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just wondering tell us some examples of what's in this issue that you were holding up.
Okay, so this was last year's number 20, and it has a story about a man called Mighty Joe Moravitz, who was a mountain man, kind of a character lived in the area. And there is, oh, here's a fun story of Robert Moran's photos of the Rosario Resort.
Oh.
I'm trying to see here. So that goes into shipyards and all kinds of interesting stuff with that family and the photograph collections that, so that is Orcas Island. There you go.
Yeah, now who wrote that story?
So that is written by John M. Harris.
Huh, okay.
And I didn't edit that one. I think Dean did. So I'm not as familiar with that story. He's an associate professor of journalism at Western.
Huh.
John Harris is. So.
Okay.
And then there's Wright Brothers Boat Manufacturing. That was down in Fairhaven over the years. Story about them. A couple of stories about the Northwest Passage newspaper, which was kind of a 60s and 70s staple radical newspaper. A story about Frank Tech, who was a local newspaper editor, also wrote poetry. So Dean Kahn of the Herald, really involved with poetry. So he always gets stories about poets in here. Helen Logie story. So again, ties to the islands with Helen Logie. And recently, a member of the Parberry family, Brad Parberry, now has purchased what was the oldest brick building, the territorial courthouse here in Bellingham. It's this little tiny building. It's sandwiched in between all of what the Parberry family's recycling warehouses empire. And so he, being one of the family members who I think he lives in San Francisco, but he's taken a real interest in local history and has restored the building, which the Historical Society had owned and done wonderful work on. And then a flood happened and kind of undid everything and was a real financial disaster. But he has a whole Helen Logie art collection. So that is now going to be his gallery for that. And then the Historical Society still gets to use the building and it looks beautiful. I just got to go in and see a sneak peek of it. So that's kind of interesting. Also, there's a story about Woodstock Farm in here, which is now kind of getting some attention. It's, you know, like I said, it's been on the National Register. And then a story about there's a memorial down at Zwanich Park here in Bellingham for fishermen lost at sea. And so it's just a little story kind of chronicling that memorial and, you know, the story behind it and making the memorial and everything. So there's really a lot of variety of things. Just we'll take it if it's historically interesting. Yeah,
very much so. I love
that. It's been really fun.
Stuff in there about Helen Logie. That's awesome.
Yeah, and Helen Logie, I've fallen in love with. Also in Bellingham here, I live in the Columbia Eldridge neighborhood, which is I think our first historically designated neighborhood, although I'm way on the edge of it, not in one of the big fancy houses. But her family's house is here in the neighborhood, and it's a pretty neat, cool house, where she sometimes also did art when she wasn't over on the island. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
That's very exciting.
And her art is amazing. I love it. So if you haven't
Do you
seen
have
it or
any
had a
pictures
chance,
of her art?
let me find. I am sure I do.
Because, you know,
Um,
I just found an article about when she purchased her property on Orcus and posted it on the Then and Now page. But I don't have any of her art. I haven't really looked too much, but I just thought I'd ask. And
yeah, there's not a lot on, you know, public domain on the internet. But I can show you what I have, which some of it was shared for those articles.
You know, Vicki, let me say that when I was researching Marjorie Walker, my goal was to find, to get as much photo documentary on her art. Yeah. And so I used Then and Now and a lot of community publicity to say, hey, does anybody have any of this art? And we got lots of it. And I know that there's still tons of it that, you know, that I don't know about it, that's here or there, but that would be a way to start to find her art if you want to find it.
that's a good idea.
Well, you know, Leo Lambiel, you know, Leo's place, he's sold it and moved. I think he moved to Bellingham, but he had a huge collection of her art.
Look at that.
So
beautiful.
now, yeah, I'm curious if he's going to connect with the Bellingham, maybe the Parberries. Wow.
Yeah,
this is Ramona, and I've got a couple of her. I think they might even be postcards. Because at Christmas time she'd send hand sketched cards, similar to that, out to family members, and this was from my friend in Olga. And then the Parberries are cousins of mine, so you know, so I know lots of stories about them.
The Parberries they got great history too in this town.
Oh, cool.
That's
fun.
funny.
Hey, I have a general question for anybody, you know, Colby or Kathy or Sandy, or if Robin's still on too. You know, I'm finding these great articles in Genealogy Bank, and there's a lot of photos that are attached to those articles. Sadly, they don't come through very good. Oh, that's pretty too. They don't come through very well. And I don't know, a lot of them were by Joseph Scalia, you know, that worked for the Times or the PI, that, and it would be lovely if I could get a better copy of that. I don't know where or how to do that with the newspaper. I just thought maybe somebody might know.
From which paper?
I think it's the Seattle Times or the PI. Can't remember which. Yeah,
I don't know either. But you know, it may be likely that the Seattle Museum has an archive of the newspapers. Okay. And I would call there, because they may, and they also may know how to tap into whatever archive stuff is accessible. Okay. That would be great. That's just a guess. Okay, well, it's a place to start. I appreciate that.
Had such great luck during the pandemic. You know, it's been frustrating not being able to go to archives and libraries myself, but I've just been blown away at how many times I've requested some random thing from some library or archive somewhere, and they just get right back to me and send me everything I wanted and don't even charge me money. I was like, what? Great.
That's good to know.
So thank you all, librarians and archivists.
I just wanted to share a couple of things. This is sort of something I'm working on, but I think it would be a benefit to Colby as well. You know how about a year ago, as our genealogy club did research on the Dorveller family, where we have those portraits in the museum, and we were
Yeah.
trying to figure out what their story was. Well, I've been talking to Nancy, and I'm going to write some articles about them. And the name of the plant, kind of popped in my mind because I believe some of the newspaper articles we saw about the Dorvellers, they were friends with the plants, and they were in Orcas around the same time, early 1900s. So I'm going to go back to my research and see, what exactly the connection was, but I can share that with everybody. Also, so these articles I'm working on with Mary Jane, she's got that fascinating history about the founding of the Mormon church and all that kind of stuff. And then Frank, I want to share with you also, Kolby, because he was quite a scoundrel and he lived in Bellingham.
I love it.
Exactly.
So when I get those things ready, I should have the articles. I'm trying, my issue is editing because there, I have 30 pages of research and trying to get it down to like 500 words. So
I know.
but anyway, that's the issue. But I will take a look and see if I can find these connections, but I'll share those articles with you. And then Nancy, I should have that in the next week and a half or so.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Isn't it funny how even though it's Bellingham or San Juan or, it's there's so many people that are interconnected with that, even back then, right?
I think especially back then.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
I have to say that I'm loving this conversation because it feels so much like the Writing Our History project. So I'm so happy that the Orca group was able to absorb people because this is exactly what needs to happen.
Thanks. I am so excited about this meeting next month because Kathy and I, well, we went over to Lopez. Was it 2 years ago now? I think it was.
I guess so. Yeah.
And this article for History Link on the Richardson store, and then they did a panel discussion on it, and I mean, my God, there were 200 people there.
I know.
Amazing. So I mean, it just shows you how starved people are for this information. They want to know about where they live. And the Richardson store has been gone for years, right? Burned down, been gone for a long time. And another thing that they did was they had this panel of 6 people talking about back in the day, and it was people that had either been born here or people that have come later, and just how much things have changed. So I'm looking forward to that for our history.
One of my goals has been a tour of Fairhaven. I don't know how many of you have been to Fairhaven and Bellingham, but even in my lifetime, that neighborhood has come a long way and has changed a lot, and has a really fascinating history from the sort of hippie years that is something that I've wanted to build a tour or presentation around, because people love remembering things that are from within our lifetimes, too. Yeah. So
this is Nancy from Lopez. Do you remember Toad Hall in Fairhaven?
I mean, it's before my time, honestly, but I have many stories of it. In fact, I talk about it on our spooky tour. And I know John Blevin in Bellingham, who I believe was involved with Toad Hall when it was operating. So yeah,
I remember hanging out there when I was in, cruising through and it was a coffee house in the basement of I think old bank building.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I know. I think Ken Kesey was a famous visitor. There's some stories about it. So that was the Nelson building, which is a big building on the corner of 11th and Harris. Across from, there's a double-decker bus that's been sitting in a lot across the street from there forever. Well, not forever. I remember when it was moved there. But yeah, so there's, Fairhaven is really interesting to me because it was, a working class neighborhood for most of its existence, despite its original lofty aims.
Mhm.
I'm currently doing, again, next weekend on Sunday night, I'm doing a Zoom talk about Dirty Dan Harris, who's of course kind of a Bellingham famous figure and Fairhaven's kind of quote unquote founding father, who's heavily romanticized, but is a fun character to talk about. So.
I'm kind of curious. My son has been living in an apartment building. I think it's 205 West Hawley. And I think it was the old Northwest hardware store.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, I got a gift certificate to come on your tour, and I'm excited because I think he's been in that apartment or another apartment around there for a long time. But does anything come to the top of your head about 205 West Hawley?
Yeah, there's some great stories from that area and that building. And yeah, those are great apartments too. I've been in there.
Yeah, well, it's got its pluses and minuses in terms of heat.
Yeah.
But yes, but anyway, I just am excited to sort of hear a little bit more. But
okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, when we get there.
You know, I'm feeling a little bit torn now about this last year and how we have all adapted and used Zoom kind of presentations. And, you know, I'm sort of weighing back and forth the relative merits of both, because, you know, you can't beat having a room full of people who really are engaged and want a story. On the other hand, we're reaching farther than we did before using this. So I'm not, you know, it's like, gosh, you know, how do we make a decision to go back to one form versus the other? And anyway, that's what I'm trying to, for now we're stuck, this is what we have. Right. But in the future, as more and more people get savvy to, Zoom, and the thing about Zoom is, I think you can't really combine the two. Like you can't, I don't think it, or at least I haven't seen it work where you have a meeting, a live meeting, but you somehow Zoom it. So, I mean, I guess really savvy tech people could do that, but I haven't really seen how it
right.
works. Kathy and I were talking about the very first time that the Writing Our History project tried to have a joint Orcas San Juan Island meeting using technology between the two libraries, and it just didn't work. And we ended up putting my cell phone. It was hysterical. We had our cell phone up and try to capture the whole table. But we've come a long ways, and it'll be interesting where we go. But somebody like me, I'm not going to be able to come to your Orcas meetings. And so when you go back to being live, what do we do? So anyway, that's, I guess, our next evolution is to try to figure that out.
Maybe we record them.
Yeah.
Well, when I was working in technology for many, years ago, we would do video conferencing all the time, where you'd have two rooms of people on both sides, and you'd basically video conference, and you can do that through Zoom if you want to. But the only challenge is the timing, because like somebody's talking and somebody else on the other side's talking, and there's a lag. And so we ended up going to the point where you'd hold up a paddle, which means you're going to say something, or have to, I mean, that's like primitive, but the lag caused people to be talking over each other all the time. And that was the only issue, but that's done every day. So, you should be able to do that.
So as long as we have a big screen at the presenting, well, maybe you have to have it at both, I don't know, but
even a television size screen is fine.
Because I'd love to keep participating.
One thing I found really interesting about this group is how, so the reason that Gloria ended up writing this great thing about the Dorvillers, I mean, you really took it up, and all that was because Vicky found out that John Pike from Pike Place Market is buried on Orcas Island. And he's buried, in the same grave as a Dorviller.
Next to the door
So-
of yours, yeah.
Next to the, so anyway, that was sort of what piqued her interest. Like, okay, why is John Pike from Seattle on Orcas Island by people that shouldn't be connected with him? So it was, you know, this idea, like, everybody, let's see how much we can discover doing research in our group meeting time and what we can come up with. And Gloria really was able to take it up in a really great way. I mean, we all contributed a little bit, but what I've noticed about this group over time is that one thing that may just be a little side thing ends up leading to another thing. You know, Sandy's presentation, where she just made a little side mention of Orcas, you know, then and now, inspired
Yep.
Vicky to do that. And I've noticed that about almost every meeting, that something has completely inspired somebody in a direction that we never could have planned, you know. So who knows, you know, Kolby, what all will come of one of your little side comments.
I
Well, we've already got that going, I think, because I want to talk to Colby about doing a special tour for our yacht club. Then we're like having a trip up to Bellingham, staying on the
Yes.
waterfront, and having her do a special tour that's sort of like related to the sea. So if we do that, we'll let you guys know, so you can come along if you
Yeah.
want. And then one of the club members is a co-owner of the Cabin Tavern.
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
the
I know
cabin.
Right
her.
there at Holly and Bay
Yeah.
Street, which you were talking about, the red light district. So I think we have some real opportunity to do some fun
Yeah.
stuff. So I guess even if you guys don't want to come, if you're not with the yacht club, you could always come up and we could put you on the tour with us so you can get that yacht club perspective.
Yeah.
But
And I love this idea
Well, you know,
because, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. This
we
is
did
Nancy.
the Bellingham Sea Feast Festival for years and did sea shanty sing-alongs and have done a lot of maritime related stuff for that. So I think this will be really fun. Sorry to interrupt.
Nancy,
Well,
go
I was
ahead.
going to mention Nancy Lopez. I was just going to mention the same thing, that the Whatcom Museum used to do these water tours, or the bay tours.
They will
I
be
guess,
back also
which-
this summer on the boat. Yeah.
good to know. Good
And
to
those are fabulous. And I think Brian Griffin has been the narrator on board for those in the past few years. And he's amazing. So that's
Well, that was
also a
another
very
reason it seemed really great to have Kolby come, because we're all taking little adventures now and then. And how many of us know that much about Bellingham or what to do? And if we're interested in things like that, it just seemed like such a natural fit for our interests and exploration. And I also want to give a shout out to Jeff Jewell at the Whatcom Museum. Man, oh man, if you have anything you want to know about Bellingham or Whatcom County, he's the photo archivist and amazing person and amazing information. And so that's...
he has a photographic memory, I swear.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
called him up to get,
Yeah.
because I was having trouble getting some good photographs for this installation we're doing. And
Yeah.
I said, you know, do you by chance have this? And he was like, oh yeah, we have that, and sent it, you know.
Right.
Oh my God. I'm using that guy all the time.
I always feel like I'm cheating if I have to go to Jeff, but
Yeah.
I do go to Jeff. You know, I'm like, Jeff, I'm tearing my hair out, and he'll tell me just where to go. And
Right.
Yeah. No, it's a great regional resource.
Fun small world fact, Colby. The director of the Whatcom Museum used to have my job in Campbell. The Campbell.
Oh, man.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. She was my boss at first there.
Uh,
Oh, funny.
Small world.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, this is a great group. I just want to say I'm kind of jealous that we don't have something like this here in Whatcom County or Bellingham, because it's been a struggle. There is a historical societies and groups, and it's very sort of scattered. Trying to make things happen is kind of a challenge at times, but thank you all for having me.
Oh,
That was great.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you. Well, I
wrote
think
down
we've been.
Susie this trip
Oh,
because
go
I loved that little comic.
Oh, it's funny. Me too. Well, I think we always have to thank the library. I've kind of said this before. It's like this connection we've made with the library has made the whole difference on it being able to happen. And so yes, that's what I feel like. It's just eternal gratitude for them, you know, allowing Holly and before her Mary to do this. And they will put information in their newsletter about us. And it just feels like this combination has been just perfect for what you're talking about, this kind of a group. So
good.
Always.
You're very
thanking
welcome.
you guys.
Yes, we so
Holly,
appreciate
when
it.
does the newsletter come out next?
First week, they put it out in the first week, right, Holly, of the month. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal. The goal is to have it go out on the first day. We don't always meet that goal.
No, you never meet that.
Holly, if I send you the calendar for History Lives Here month, could you include some of the events?
I can run it by the director. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great.
Kathy and Vicki, I have a couple little updates to give everybody.
Yeah,
I just wanted to
good.
let you know. One thing I wanted to update you on was when I spoke a couple meetings ago about the AI technology and
Mhm.
genealogy research. I talked to you about a product called Storyfile, which was
Yeah.
being developed out of USC. Anyway, it is launching in June, and they have this software called Conversa, which is the platform it's going to be running on, that will be available in May. And one of the beta testers, or one of the pilot people that is involved with it, is William Shatner. He has done his own story file in the beta test. And so that should be available. You could probably look at it and have a conversation with him if you want to, on the Storyfile app, if you go into the Storyfile website. And then the other thing is, as I was doing the research for the AI presentation, I came across a lot of information about privacy related to DNA and online research. And so that's one thing I'm working on for June, I think it's June, on how the DNA that's available on these databases and the search capabilities there are being used by law enforcement and academia. And some of the things it's not like it's a bad thing, it's just things you need to be aware of, because a lot of the sites, including Ancestry and some of the major players in the field, they have you give an opt-in or you have to agree to participate. But with DNA, that agreement is you can agree to do it personally, but then your DNA is out there connected to so many other people. So it's a very interesting challenge, because just because you give your approval, somebody else in your DNA chain might not want that to be the case. And it's unfortunately that one person gets the approval and then it's out there for everyone. So it's just a little challenge. And also some of the things that are being done with in academia, looking at trends. I mean, they're looking at trends like migration trends of populations for sociology research. I mean, there's all these things going on that you guys, it would just be good to know about. Not that it's bad, not that it's good, just be aware. So that's my presentation in June.
That's going to be
Good.
awesome.
Wow.
And
Well, it'll be fun if you can include a little bit of that story file information as well, unless
Okay.
that's a whole separate
Yeah,
presentation.
if I could
later.
demo it, just like, let's
Yeah.
just do, maybe we can demo William Shatner's one.
Yeah.
And we can just, you can ask him questions about,
Gosh.
Star Trek or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, that would certainly make for an interesting press release.
Yeah.
yes. Beam me up.
Right.
So
Well,
I've got to go. Nice seeing everybody. And Colby,
nice
thank
seeing
you.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank
much.
you so much. Thank you. Are we good?
Yes, I think we're
Yeah.
good. Thanks so much, Colby.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
you're
that
very
was-
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was really fun. All right.
Bye.